Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first edition of the Rose and Rubini podcast. My name is Manas Chavla, and today I'm joined by the founder and CEO of Rose and Rubini, Mr. Brunello Rosa. And today, there's lots of things that are distracting our attention, everything going on in the US to the tensions of the Ukraine, but we've got our eyes glued to a tectonic shift in European politics, the Italian presidential election that's coming up soon. Brunel, let's start by just sort of setting the scene a little bit because Italy is a complicated system and it's particularly notorious for its presidential elections because there's no formal candidates, there's multiple secret ballots, and there are often intense backroom negotiations, so much so that it's often likened to a papal conclave. Brunello, can you just start off by giving us a quick summary of the role of the Italian president, but also how the election process for this role works?
Sure. Thank you, Manas, and welcome everybody. Yes, the Italian presidential election is a complicated one. There are multiple ballots, secret votes. Parties need to reach an agreement by crossing the usual boundaries between center right, center left, and so on. Because in the first three ballots, a supermajority is required. From the fourth ballot, a simple majority is required, but most of the time it's very hard to elect a president even at the fourth and following ballots. Sometimes it can take weeks to get to an agreed name. But this is because the Italian president is a very key figure in the Italian institutional setting. Very often is not understood its role. In tranquil time, it's true, it's almost a ceremonial role, but in turbulent times, which in Italy are more or less the norm, it becomes kind of the deus ex machina of the system. He appoints the prime minister, he appoints all the ministers, he can veto the laws, is the head of the army, he presides the council that oversee the judiciary, and as other numerous roles that it may be too long to discuss now. But anyway, it is clear that he's a powerful figure and is the one that keeps very open the contacts with transatlantic allies, with European allies, and is a guarantor of the constitution. So electing the right person is crucial for Italy at every point in time, but of course, clearly at this specific point in time.
Definitely. And let's give our listeners a bit of sort of context as well on the political backdrop that Italy's in. I mean, we've often talked about how the entire parliamentary system right now is quite fragmented. And there's lots of sort of separate parties, all with their own interests, their own priorities, their own ideological bases vying for influence. And there isn't quite a very dominant opposition or a very dominant sort of central party controlling the scene. How does this fragmentation, do you think, contribute to the president's role as you said, the deus ex machina of the system?
The fragmentation doesn't help. The election is much easier when there's a dominant party, so to speak, that is able to create a coalition around some agreed name. But make no mistake, in the past, even when the Christian Democrats were by far the largest party, they control a majority or at least a very important minority in parliament. They were not able to elect the person that they might have wanted at the beginning. And in particular, the most relevant political figures, names that didn't make it to the presidency, include Andreotti, Fanfani, or Craxi, or very relevant political figure that at some point seemed to be in control of the system, yet having enough support from the entire parliament plus the regional representatives to become elected president is a totally different game.
Right. And speaking of people that have seem to have control over the system, currently that person seems to be the one and only Mario Draghi, who came into office not more than 11 months ago. And he's really sort of capitalized on his background as a technocrat to sort of galvanize cross-party support for the EU recovery plan, to steer, a first batch of reforms to Parliament, and to really start to cut through Italy's bureaucratic thicket. Brunello, you've always said that Draghi is better off being president than prime minister. Why is that?
Yes, we made that call, if you want, months ago. But actually, my first discussion on the issue of whether Draghi would be better off in Palazzo Chigi, where the prime minister is, and Quirinale, where the president stays, is dated in early 2020, when Mario Draghi was nowhere near the Italian political system. He had just left the ECB, was in his cool-off period, and he only was appointed almost a year later in February 2021. Yet, I cannot foresaw that Draghi would become part of the picture at some point. It was unclear whether he would become president or prime minister. Well, eventually became prime minister first, and then the question is whether he's better off there or at Quirinale Palace. And still today, the political parties not agreed on what's better. In my opinion, it would be better at Quirinale because it will be able to guarantee 7 uninterrupted years of institutional stability for the country, which is very much needed, and reassure the allies in Europe and across the Atlantic about the loyalty of Italy to its traditional alliances. Whether they are good or not, it doesn't matter, but there are facts, and as the Latins used to say, pacta sunt servanda. Instead, Italy, unfortunately, has a bit of a history of being somehow unreliable on international alliances. And unfortunately, this is something that country has to deal with. So Draghi would guarantee that kind of continuity. However, though, it can't go from Chigi to Quirinale without opening a huge problem at the presidency of the Council of Ministers, so in the Prime Minister, of who's going to be after him. And clearly, parties are not going to open a crisis without knowing what the solution is ex ante. So somehow electing him president means also finding a prime minister at the same time. Not easy when the political system is as fragmented as it is now, as I said.
Right. And I mean, Italy's corporate circles definitely seem to agree with you. They seem to be unanimously almost rallying behind Draghi to become president, primarily in the hopes that the sort of political stability that Draghi would bring would really strengthen Italy's debt sustainability. But there's also like the reverse argument, like you mentioned, if he becomes president, we need a new prime minister. And given how fragmented the system is, what happens if the Italy's parties can't agree on one and they have to call an early election? Do you see that as being a significant risk, Brunello?
So, yeah, you're right. Somehow the corporate sector, financial sector across the board seems to be preferring Draghi at Quirinale. That wasn't actually the position initially, unlike our case. Most people wanted him to stay at Palazzo Chigi to oversee the implementation of the recovery plan. But we think that recovery plan can still be guaranteed with Draghi at Quirinale. Now, are early elections possible? In theory, yes. In practice, it's so much harder. The next president is very unlikely to dissolve the parliament that he has just elected him. And also, nobody really wants to go among the major political parties to early elections. So everybody wants to have another year of this parliament, not just to implement the recovery plan, but also to arrive very well prepared at the February 2023 general election, having position clearly within the political spectrum, something that has been impossible so far under a national unity government. So all this seems to suggest that early elections are quite unlikely at this stage.
Right. And I mean, we've been sort of talking about Draghi as has been everyone else, but the Italian presidential elections definitely, past history indicate they have a tendency to bring up candidates that were previously underestimated. Are there any serious contenders, do you think? Any serious contenders from the center right, from the center left?
As you said, It's like a roulette. You never know which number is going to come up at some point in the Italian presidential elections. In the past, people that were nowhere near the other streams ended up being elected. And this is the case. Many names have been made, most of which unfortunately are going to be burned. And people say the simple fact that they are nominated way too early means that unfortunately they are not going to make it.
Mm.
We know that the center right can count on people like Casellati, the president of the Senate, or other former ministers such as Franco Frattini, for example. The center left could count on institutional figures such as Romano Prodi, the former president of the EU Commission, or Paolo Gentiloni, the EU Commissioner for Economic and Monetary Affairs at the moment. Um, However, these people seem quite unlikely to make it at this stage. Other names have been made recently. Elisabetta Belloni from the former foreign ministry, now effectively head of the intelligence services in Italy. Sabino Cassese, former president of the Italian Constitutional Court, and I can, of course, name others.
Mm.
The key point is not the person is going to be elected, but the method that is going to be followed to elect this person. Unfortunately, this stage is exactly this method that seems to be missing. That's why we are going through repeated unsuccessful attempts to elect somebody.
Right. No, that's super useful, and this is definitely an issue. We'll keep watching as it comes. Brunello, always super useful to get your insight. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Panas. Till next time.